All right. Hey, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for our first keynote of our 2022 conference. Really excited to introduce our moderator and speaker today. Our speaker will be Asha Keddy, who is Corporate Vice President at the Intel Corporation, where she's working on 5G wireless and connected computation. She's working on a lot of Intel's efforts in developing future products involving the convergence of computations, computing, and AI, and defining future networks that will enable a range of industrial, enterprise, and consumer applications. And she'll be joined by Laura Mead, our moderator, who is an IT strategic program and project manager with years of experience managing health, education, and digital transformation technology interventions and leading technology-based socioeconomic impact evaluations. We're really excited to hear from both of them today as they discuss Asha's career journey and the insights she has regarding the development of next generation technologies and the importance of making these developments sustainable, inclusive, and focused on the broader good. So I'll hand it over to Lauren and Asha now to take it away, and hope you all enjoy.
Yeah, well, welcome everyone. If this is your first event today, and if it's not, then hope you've been enjoying the programming so far. Asha and I are delighted to be here and to share with you and hear your questions and be able to, form a community of women in engineering. And I guess, we want to be pretty informal and just really have a dialogue here. It's such a joy to be able to speak with Asha in this kind of setting. It's really a luxury. Of course, I wish we could be in person. But, that being said, it's so easy for us to connect over, our Wi-Fi or our wireless networks, however you're connecting. So, we can think Intel for some of that. Of course, this is just the tip of the iceberg, right, of what connectivity can do for us. So I guess, Asha, I just want to start and learn more, help the audience learn more about you if they don't know already, just where your career began and what motivated you to become an engineer in the first place and work on these groundbreaking technologies.
Thanks, Lauren. And thanks everybody and I'm grateful to be here. And, Lauren, as you know, both our companies have done a lot for wireless, right? Including the policy, or your previous, but what motivated me was when I was young. I think in India, it started like I spent a little time in the US as a child and then back in India. And people kept asking back then for boys if they want what they wanted to be when they grew up, and it was an engineer or a doctor. And for girls, who would you marry? And it was a different question because it was so focused on who you married, and it made my fifth grade brain get irritated and figure out at one point that it's really about economic independence. So that's when my journey began. Of course, now the world is very different, but and then I just couldn't cut frogs because I liked animals and the whole thing. So it just and I was good at math, so it just became more engineering. Having said that, I do enjoy the concept of solving puzzles and figuring out things. And there's something very sobering about like math or other things that doesn't talk back at you or judge you and lets you, do it again and again. So that's basically what inspired me, Lauren. And, then one thing led to another. And as you mentioned, we're all here because of the connectivity. So it's always joyful. Like I sometimes forget like the work we did has helped people be connected on the pandemic and beyond.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think when you talk about economic independence, it makes me think of my grandmother who said, a woman needs to have her own source of money. So your own bank account or credit card or mobile wallet these days. And you need to know that sometimes you might just need to sleep on the street. And if you do, newspapers are really warm.
Wow. Newspapers. Where do you find those? That's not online.
Right. Well, that's really cool that you were able to decide for yourself, hey, these are my strengths. This is my passion, not so much into, cadavers, which is what we do a lot of at the med school, but
an important work too, but not for me.
Sure. Yeah. not for the faint of heart, and math doesn't have blood and things. So so that's really cool that you were able to follow your passion in that sense. Did your career take shape in a way where it was kind of a straight journey then? You just said, you know what, I'm going to be an engineer and the path is clear? Or how did you navigate that from the ideation to, yeah, I'm going to be a CVP at Intel?
It's just so I'll give you the short answer and then a slightly long answer. The short answer is essentially, you know, when there's a Robert Frost poem, right? Like when you come upon a fork in the road, take the road less known, right? Or you have the choice. So it's a lot of forks and a lot of hard work and a lot of luck and a lot of circumstances, all of it above. And because you don't know what you don't know, and even look at the last years, we couldn't necessarily even plan out the next few months, right? But what I always did was I started with engineering. Computers were an emerging field, and I kind of liked programming, so that's what led me to computer science. And it wasn't a straight path because I was actually in software, and then when I worked on a few things, I got picked up because I had a mix of not just engineering skills, but let's just say decent interpersonal skills. And sometimes that is as important, if not more important, in how you make people feel, how do you work with. And that's what led me towards a more management path. It was difficult at first because I felt like I'm moving away from actually doing things towards like helping others succeed. But then over time, I learned that there's a lot of joy and you can have a lot of things in it. I also learned a lot about policy, which is more up your alley in this, because without policy, you can't do a lot of things. And I'm grateful that today we're going to have more policies that will help, the underserved areas, whether it's Native Americans or rural or poorer neighborhoods with all the broadband initiatives. So all of these came to my interest, and I did different things. And talking about grandmothers, my grandmother was educated till third grade. She got married in third grade actually, and my mom actually finished high school, though my dad continued even as an adult to postdoctorate. And so it was really against the norm for my community because I was too educated to be ever married back then. So it's always, you have your pluses and then you have like, what are you thinking times all the time. And so, and doing what you enjoy. But the biggest thing I would say is take risks, not like, take risks, push yourself out of your comfort zone. And have I done everything like where I follow my own advice? No. And I should, but I would just encourage people to embrace risk because life is a journey, and when we treat it like a journey, we can see where it leads and how we can enjoy things versus a destination. How about you, Lauren? Like, how did you also feel like it's more sinuous versus a linear path?
Oh yeah, it's definitely been a winding road, and I think my family background was a little different than yours. I was in Indiana, in a college town, not in India.
Rhyming names, India, Indiana.
Yeah, well, actually, and then when it was time to decide what school I wanted to go to, and this is probably a decision that many of our viewers were faced with pretty recently. So I don't know if people know Fazoli's. It's a pizza chain in the Midwest. And so my parents brought me to Fazoli's, and it was just us without my brother. And I was going to tell them what school I decided to go to. And I said, I'm not going to school. I'm going to go to India. and they just, the look of shock. I wish I had it on tape. I didn't have a smartphone then. They didn't exist. But if I had, I would have been ready to put them on Vine or whatever. And So yeah, they were shocked, and I said, "Well, I'll defer a year, and I want to go to India, and I want to help people." And at the time, I was really passionate about Tibetan issues of Tibetan independence, and so I wanted to go work with ex-political prisoners and help teach them English and computer skills. And so that's what I ended up doing for a couple months. And then I came back and did a couple other passion projects with music and, kind of explored other things locally. And then I went to school a year later, but with my eyes wide open. And I felt like that experience of being in another country, especially so different with different cultures from Indiana and the US, it really had a huge impact on my trajectory. Then, when I went into studying China and Chinese and politics and policy and how to run nonprofits and data-driven decision making. And then my career then began after that in China, working in nonprofits and trying to use data to inform the next best policy to help, whatever issue it was I was working on at the time. I worked on a couple. So yeah, for me, it has always been the social, what change do I want to see in the world? And how do I make that possible? And, all of it really led back to data-driven decision making, actionable insights. How do we do things better?
Yeah.
And I don't want to get ahead of myself because I know people are really interested in your career, but I think you probably, with your movement towards basically the leading technology in the field is now what you're in charge of for Intel. And just, I don't know, maybe we could talk a little bit about 5G and what you're doing in that space and the factors that are really developing and have come to fruition to make such a transformational change in the industry from 3G to 4G, and now we're 4G to 5G. We're rolling it out, with mixed results. We had the airplane issue we're working through, but what's your role in that change, and what do you see as the driving forces that are going to keep pushing that change forward?
Thanks, Lauren. So the way I think about it is I've had various roles. I really like this concept of journey, like life being a journey and even careers being a journey. And at the beginning of the transition, way back in 2015, it was more in creation, right? Where we tried, and we had a very ambitious goal of creating a fully connected, mobile, intelligent world. And the real emphasis was from connected things. And the beginning years of 5G, we've been focused on like backwards compatibility and more of the same, like faster speeds, and that's all getting rolled out, right? So you don't, you can get Wi-Fi speeds at 5G anywhere and things like that. But that was more to me like a checkbox item, something we needed to get done. The more transformational aspects of 5G we've still not looked at. And that was also designed, it takes a while for it to be designed, worked out, and then implemented, which is the transformation in our lives over the last 3 years that we got from these phones. We now aim to see like in how enterprises work. For example, whether it's AR, VR, or whether it's real-time systems like robots, right? And how can they move around? And how can we look at IoT and sensors, for example, we have a lot of drought in the West. So can we look at the measurement of water so that we don't overwater it and we conserve water? Can we look at sensors so that we don't have to send people out all the time and, pollute reduce the cars because we can get the information some other way? So to me, the real transformation needs to start with all of these issues. Also, Nothing exists in isolation anymore. 5G, AI, what we call edge computing, which is having things that are towards closer to you. AI is basically what I think of AI is personalization and customization. So, like, your experience or whatever you need at your home, Lauren, is different from what I need at my home and what somebody in India or in somebody China needs at their home, right? So, this is what I think of AI. And when we think about all these multidisciplinary things, we cannot like do things on our own. We have to have that communications, which is also a teething journey, as you mentioned, with the FAA and the airplanes, because it was more, I think a lot of that could have been avoided. Like many of the other countries did not end up doing it the manner we did. So I think it's a training right back to policy, right? It's all about how do we look at the policymakers? How do we over communicate across disciplines? How do we work with the mayors for smart cities? How do we work with the enterprise owners? So I think that is basically a lot of that richness. And then I moved on from like the creation and the modem to some of the networks and private networks. And today I'm actually looking more at the application side of it versus creating the technology and a little bit towards what's next. Because if you look towards 2030, the concepts around everything having a physical representation or a digital twin, and we all talk about these things that we're experimenting in, whether we call it the metaverse or whether we call it augmented, the physical reality, and also that requires a tremendous amount of compute power, right? And that requires a tremendous amount of connectivity. And we can't scale without, if you look at all of this. So we have to really look at how do you make these sustainable? How do you make it more energy efficient? How do you ensure that we're not creating the digital divide to be much more than it is? So I think it is kind of imperative now that we actually look at the cost of creation of these enhancing things as we move towards a world that is not about wireless and just phones or PCs or but a world where even everything is connected. I don't know if everything needs to be connected to. Like I have two light bulbs that can only be turned on to a computer with Wi-Fi. And it's my pet peeve that there's no button on it. And I said, I'm never going to buy those lights again, right? So everything's connected. And sometimes I just want, that. So we'll live and learn and adapt and modify.
Yeah, I mean, it is so powerful, and yet sometimes you want a tactile experience. So finding that balance between, our privacy and the benefits of having the personalization and the customization. And I think it's to some extent, it's up to everyone. It's up to companies and service providers to allow consumers to individualize their own settings as they're comfortable, and to make it as secure as possible, but also allow for that freedom for people to share as much as they're comfortable with. And I love just the use cases you mentioned about smart irrigation and agriculture, where we can really save water through AI, machine learning, and 5G networking. And I think you've mentioned before preventing fires with edge technology, right? I mean, have you seen that in practice specifically, or like in California? I mean, it's such a huge issue now, and I don't live there anymore, so I don't follow it as closely. But I mean, it's those kinds of technologies that are really gonna save us from ourselves, essentially.
Yeah, so I'll answer on water. I know there's a lot of efforts and operators, including like T-Mobile and all, have these test beds. And, all the major operators have where they're looking and working with how do they create the private networks for farmers and all of that. On the preventing fires, actually Joe Madden at Mobile Experts was talking about it. So I'll give him, credit, but it's actually theoretically possible, but it goes back to that interdisciplinary and how do we get it done, right? Because you have to work with the electricity suppliers and all of it, but it is possible because you can just cut off the wire using sensors before it hits the floor. And I think we will see the next few years focusing on more of hopefully those kind of aspects, that because even at CTIA, like which is the cellular telecommunications of the US, a focus this year is on sustainability, better life, and all of these kind of areas. And these are huge issues. We're not going to have a comfortable life even post pandemic, right? If we're not going to address some of these. And so, short answer is yes, the beginning, but not but we still have a long way to go towards, because first you have to imagine, design, and that says it. So the water stuff, I think, is a lot more happening, and that's why the policy where the rural area gets impacted and gets covered with connectivity is critical, 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 right? And now that the broadband initiative is rolling out, so that we'll have rural coverage, coverage on everyone, I think it'll really transform, because think about what you and I take for granted with connectivity.
Oh, yeah.
And we don't even have 2G, barely any 2G connection. So if they get connected the way we will, and innovation is in the human brain. It's not like limited to degrees or people or geos. So I'm just looking forward where they may even design solutions in rural areas and all with ideas that we have never thought of, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And actually, I've worked on a couple projects where we have, deployed mobile broadband to areas that don't have that capability in small pockets, test beds, so that, people living in rural reservations in Arizona near the Grand Canyon can actually upload their health data. So if they've got long-term chronic conditions, they can send the data that they're measuring, using their IoT healthcare devices to their providers, so that their providers can, in near real time, give them information they need and say, oh, actually, this is what you need to do in the next 10 minutes, or, you're at a critical point. Let me guide you. And sort of to enable those kinds of connections.
Mm-hmm.
That's not, you don't need a 5G or 6G connection to do that. You just need some better access, which I think our rural areas have really, struggled with that, and remote education as well. They've struggled more during the pandemic, without the ability to connect as readily or as seamlessly on devices through networks. And yeah, so bringing everyone up to a level, and as you said, the innovation that will come when more people are exposed to more technologies, just the use cases can skyrocket, and who knows what they will create, because their experience is different than the developer in San Francisco's experience. And
Yeah, exactly. The developer in San Francisco needed Uber, right? Or things like that.
right.
And their experiences will be different. And it's really near and dear to my heart, because we're alive because of rural America, right? Because, they feed us, which is like so basic. So I really think this transformation is overdue.
Yeah, absolutely. And just, I guess, on this point though, do you see if there's, we're talking about sustainability and water conservation and fire prevention and increasing quality of life between rural and urban areas. I mean, there's all these social issues that can be transformed and solved through the technologies that you're working on. I mean, and yet, you know, it could be seen that there are other things driving 5G and edge compute and AI. China's using AI and machine learning and sensors and IoT for, surveillance of their population. But what do you see as the balance between just pushing the limit to try to develop better and faster, more powerful computing for the next generation versus, oh, we've got all these societal problems. Let's think about how to solve those.
Good question. And it's a very complicated answer, which is why the older I grow, the more I realized everything's there's things, the way I look at this problem that you said is we have to understand what values we are optimizing on. And usually what happens is sometimes we can over optimize on one value versus another. What do I mean by that, right? We need to look at what's the role of privacy? What's the role of security? We live in a capitalistic society. What's the role of profit? What's the role of policy? Because policies can offset just a pure profit mentality so everybody gets lifted, correct? And what's the role of regulation? Because if you overregulate, then you don't have innovation. But if you underregulate, you can have bad things. A hammer can be used to build houses, and a hammer can be used for very bad things. And this topic that you mentioned is so important, but also so existential in everything we do, right? How do you use cloning, right? Where do you put the line to? How do you do research in medicine? You talked about AI, the surveillance, but what about like if you don't have a population where you have represented everybody? We have seen like already AI is just the beginning, right? So we have seen a lot of optimizations that were bad because they were on values that were not complete. So I think two things are really, really important in this balance. We need to have like a societal code of what are the values we need to do, right? So that we first remember to optimize across all of these things, including like in California, I am actually jealous because they have better privacy than the rest of the US, right? More like the Europeans. But that's my personal thing. So I think we need to look at all of these values. The second thing that we're not going to get this right if we don't do it well is education, and education of the policymakers, education of everybody involved. And we have to make technology and the usage simple so that it's not just the engineers who can go and decide the values and do it in the high-tech areas of California, but we have to make it where John or Jane Doe in who's running a tractor, or somebody who's I don't know, selling flowers, right? They all need to be comfortable with the notions of these technology areas, just as we're all comfortable with, listening to music or some of the latest, right? And so I think all of these really get important. And we've all seen like these Twitter kind of things where it's like short sentences that then like exemplify one value or another, and we create a lot of misinformation. And that's not a way where we can move forward in any area, right? A lot of our actions are all about creation and sustainability, but also a lot of our actions can do untold destruction, right? And so how do you balance all of it? And the truth of the matter is a capitalistic society will have a more for-profit pool, but that also aids innovation, right? If you look at where that is absent, you don't have that innovation. So long answer. And I think that some of the governments, because as you know, policy is so critical, will have different solutions than others. And even in the US, some of the states have different priorities and policies, right? So very, very complicated answers, but I'm really gotten focused on we need to optimize across many different kinds of values.
Yeah, that makes such sense. And I actually, being married to an economist, we talk a lot about optimizing, and there's a lot of different. Oops, I just clicked on cancel. No, I don't want to leave. That we want to be optimizing across all of these different factors, and we can do it at once, right? It's not an either or thing, and it's dependent upon, the groups, the communities, the populations we're talking about, and their wants and needs and their voices, in the policy space, in the tech space, and as consumers. And right, so I think there's a lot to dig in there, and it's not, all or nothing, really. I guess, let's see, we've got about 10, 15 more minutes. I just, for me, I've always been, I've been involved in technology, from that social and policy side, more than the engineering side. And it still boggles my mind when I think about what we're capable of. And I guess I'm kind of like my dad. Every time he flies to see us, I say, "Oh, Dad, how's the flight?" And he says, "Oh, it's a miracle of aviation."
It's true.
And when you stop and think about it, if you're not an aerospace engineer every day, you're like, wow, it is pretty incredible what we're capable of. So do you ever stand back and think, wow, the team that I've built and, what we've done is just incredible, and what we're going to do is incredible. And, just the awe of all that we're able to accomplish.
Yeah, all the time. In fact, even this phone is incredible, right? If you look at all the things that went into it, and the fact also, I'm more humbled to be a part of it. As you know, it takes a village. And by the way, feel free to ask questions to us, right? And so I'm in awe, but I have to remind myself because I forget. In the minute, I forget. And it takes a village, right? Drops of ocean. And so it all, I think, whether it's Edison back then, I kind of sometimes am in more awe of like Newton and Edison, or like Curie, or even Ada Lovelace, right? Like, I mean, I look and she's the daughter of a poet, Lord Byron, and she was like the first programmer. And so, and the NASA stories, right? So I'm in awe of a lot of that, more than today, because I think I have a little bit taking it for granted, right? Because I'm a part of it. Because there they had to like imagine things that didn't exist. And then I think of even the writers. So thank you for reminding me, like, we have to be in awe of all of this, or we get to be. And yeah, it is, when I remember it, I'm always amazed. Having said that, I forget it a lot, and I take things for granted, and I can get frustrated, and I lose perspective. So it's always a journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess just kind of going back to the personal, and I think we'll probably wrap up here so in a little bit so people can start to ask questions. Your position and your growth in your career, being a woman of color, has that influenced the way your career took shape and the experiences you had? I mean, and your upbringing and everything. Do you look back and think, oh, wow, that's what led me to be who I am, and achieve all I've been able to do? And I guess on that note, do you have any advice for other women beginning a career in STEM, and how to think about their role and their position and their journey?
Good question. I think at some point you both remember and you forget. What do I mean by that? They weren't back to my community. Remember, I was too educated, right? But then when you come here, and this happened even in class when I was in engineering undergrad, I was 3 of 60. And but when I came to the US also, it's always been less, but it's gotten even more declined. And when you look at the hiring, there have been more women at the like what we call like more of the more recent college grads, or people who have graduated recently. But then when you look at the powers, right, especially using finance and venture capitalists and all, the it's been less. And part of it, it's fun to good to be, there were not a lot of women, so I didn't really categorize it as much into different things, but there weren't a lot of women. And especially if I had to redo my things, I would have focused more on finance. I did focus a lot on policy and technology. I would have focused more on finance, because if you follow the money trail, right, uh, right, the people with the money actually make a lot of the decisions, including the lobbies and the policies. And I would have spent more energy realizing that. But I was so busy being middle class, or trying to be middle class, that, because it's like always like, my goal in life was to be middle class, right? And
I
so,
hear you.
so I would have, so I guess I had priorities then. And so my advice would be, we've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. Embrace it. And the older I get, the more important it is. When I was younger, I said, oh, it's just like things that don't talk at me, like math or science. And, I'll work hard and I'll get through it and all. And it's, I felt more invincible in that way. But the older I grow, the more important it is to me to help women, to support other women. I'm here, including what I've done, because a lot of people help me, and it is my duty, and it is my honor, and it is my responsibility to ensure that I pay it forward, because we need to encourage everyone, women, especially in STEM, because if we do not have an active role in this multidisciplinary society, Lauren. You talked about a lot of things that can go right and a lot of things that can go very wrong. And we talked about values. And if we do not like play an active role in it, society will be also transformed in ways without our voices in it, and continue to do that. And that is not a future that any of us should live in. So we need to embrace it, have everyone understand STEM, even if they're a florist, right? Or even if and just embrace that as a part of how we build society and have those conversations. So it's not something that a few people get to do. That was a long
Yeah, no,
answer.
that's wonderful. I too, I wish I had heard your talk about finance 20 years ago when, because I did not care about money at all. And then now I'm like, kind of matters a little bit. You might want to know a little bit about, how to manage your 401k.
Or just like look at the powers. Who are the people who are rich? Who are the people that they have the influence and all of that kind of stuff, right? I aim too low, just be middle class.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, we can talk about money and politics and all the kind of horrible things, that horrible underworld there. But I could digress, and I will not. But
This is why I love STEM and education, because it's a great it's a great equalizer in providing opportunities. And this is actually what I just love about, like, when you get educated, you get ideas, and then you have access, and then you create. So it's it's a great opportunity provider.
I love that too, that STEM, everyone should know STEM, everyone. And it's
Everyone.
just, it's a baseline now
Mm-hmm.
for being, an informed and, useful and productive member of society. So actually, I am seeing lots of questions coming in now. So thank you all. We will turn to those now. The first one, which, I gotta say, we've touched upon it maybe a little bit, but it's really important to discuss, is imposter syndrome. And have you ever felt that at all? Or, I mean, you are highly educated, so maybe you're like, no, I deserve to be at the table. Thank you very much. But yeah, have you experienced that? And how would you recommend others that face that, try to work through those issues?
Yeah. I have experienced it. right? And I have just like how you have and I have done it in different ways. It's a journey. So when I was younger, coaches help a lot, or some senior mentors help a lot. So if you can get, that's one way to do it. And the coach that I had told me to take my space. Like when I used to go to the meeting, I used to sit in the back or something and said, no, take your space. So it has some and simple things to do, like taking your space, because part of it is I like these TED talks like fake it till you make it, which has a lot of element of truth. And part of it is it I start looking at it reasonably, right? Not because my voices in my head take me one different way, right? And when I start looking at it more reasonably, I say, okay, I have I have maybe three of these qualifications and maybe I can grow in two. But then these other people who had these roles before me had like maybe two of these or three of these or four of these. Everyone actually has growth areas, right? Nobody, and the more I actually focused less on myself, right? This is ironic. In imposter syndrome, I had to learn to focus less on myself, on
Mm.
my disqualifications and my issues, and take it away and start focusing more on how can I contribute with what I do have. And I then
Mm.
also realized that nobody actually knows it all, whether the people are running the country or whether they're running a company or whether they're, you know, just in school in fifth grade, right? Nobody knows it all, right? And so it really led from a more inward critic focus to an outward, how can I contribute focus? And how do I survive to how do I thrive? So it was very intentional. And it is continues to be very intentional. And it is something that I just like, if I get back into that insecurity or other things, it is something where I have to look at where I can contribute. But also, I've also gotten much better at knowing where I'm good at or what are my strengths, and where I
Mm.
just of course, where I just won't even get it there, right? And the point of imposter syndrome is you don't feel it until you're being pushed.
Mm.
And so it just means, yeah, you're being pushed, you're transitioning yourself, you're disrupting yourself. So like we talk about exercise and all, deal with that intentionality, focus on trying to survive to trying to thrive, and and then outward focus versus an inward focus have helped me. What about you, Lauren, as you think about it?
Yeah, no, I like that about, where you're saying, well, what can I contribute? What do I bring that others don't bring? What do I know really well? Um, and then not thinking about yourself, but just thinking about the problem at hand and trying to say, well, this is what I think about that from everything I've learned through my experiences and my education. And actually, I do know a lot about this. So yeah, I think I've been in those rooms before. I was lucky. I think it was lucky that in having some poor eyesight, discovered. So I had to sit in the front of the classroom to be able to see the board. And that really got me more engaged in school and asking questions. And I think asking questions just helped me forget, like, lose yourself in what you're learning or in your work. And so I love that advice of just trying to put those insecurities aside and say, yeah, let's just dive in because this is what I love. And maybe if you don't feel that way, it's not, maybe if and yeah, if you don't have a spark of excitement, then maybe you're in a field that isn't your passion, and or maybe you have to find the right angle to get passionate about it. But yeah, I think if you feel nervous, it means you care.
And you
And when you care, it means you have something to contribute if you care. So so yeah, I think um like you said, you have to kind of go for it and push yourself a little bit. and know that everyone else probably feels the same way. We have some other similar questions. Let's see. I mean, they're also great. Maybe we can build upon this one a little bit more. The question is, what do you think are the best skills the next generation should have to build a better world? In what things should we invest our time now? I know you spoke about STEM education, a little bit about financial education. But I guess especially for the young engineers out there, are there specific things that you think are really foundational to, setting us up for success, for being the next generation of innovators?
So I think, yeah, many things, right? So have fun. Let me start with that. Have fun. Don't be discouraged. I've saw some things around a string of failures. I've done that many, many times. So I know this doesn't sound intuitive because I'm sure you're all studying a lot. I'm sure you're all like working for those interviews or working for that and wanting to do well. But have fun and build resilience. Like you're all more resilient than you think. You're getting educated through a pandemic, which I did not, right? And necessity is the mother of invention, and we have much more resilience. So let's lean into it. Let's have an attitude of, how do I figure things out? I see a lot on finance, and I think what I would say is it's not that you have to get everything done in one go, right? You don't have to get like, you don't get you can get a lot of things in life, but just not all at once, correct? And so if you can have a plan that where maybe you can look at like, what does it mean to look at accounting for companies, like if you're going to join a company, right? Or just understand those models. And it's more important not when you graduate, but it's more important when after you graduate you continue your education. So the way I would look at it is, if I had to redo it, after I started work, say at Intel, I would take these classes on finance or accounting, so that because then I had money and I saw how there was the controllers or there was these other people and how they make decisions. So I wouldn't try to necessarily do it all in school, because then it becomes but I would do it as I go along in life, right? Okay, so I really, and then disruption, that's the way of life. We're always changing the technology. So long answer to the question, but I would say let's build resilience. Let's pace things out as we get it. So like in finance, it is not like you have to graduate with a finance minor, but as you go and start working, you have to start augmenting, because the more multidisciplinary you can get, while you have an expertise in one area, the more you can contribute holistically, and you also then can converse, and you can leadership is more about influence, and when you have more influence, you have to be able to follow to be able to lead, right? But when you have more influence, you can also help contribute to society in a way you can. So that's a rather long answer, but I think those kind of aspects that are more around how we take news, how we take failures, how we take successes, are way, way, way more important than the skills we have around math and science only, right? Because it's an integrated thing. Just like food. Food is not vitamins or minerals or carbs or protein, it's something whole, right? And so the things that make us whole in how we contribute or how we engage and all are important.
I love that. And I love, thinking, we're all studying something in particular at school and we have a degree in something specific. But when you get out into the world and you're, at a company, or you're at a nonprofit or a government agency, you're out there contributing, or maybe you're independently, you've started your own business, whatever it is that you're not just going to do the things you learned in school, right? You're going to have to do the business stuff, the cost benefit analysis. You're going to have to do if you're a leader, you have to know how to talk to people and how to train people and how to help your team through tough times and have that social emotional development. So being kind of well-rounded in what we know in the worlds in which we can move, I think that is really good advice. I've done my part in trying, since coming into technology from another angle, taking SQL courses on the side and, and things like that. It's like, you need to kind of understand the other languages, literally and figuratively, that people are speaking here. And maybe one last question. And this might be kind of a summary of our discussion so far, but kind of a burning question, it seems, is what can we do in the here and now to help increase equity and equality in our regions? So kind of going back to those values, and what do you see as kind of the number one or top things that we really need to understand as a society to be able to make progress in those social areas like equity and equality?
A journey of 1,000 steps start with the first, right? As you know. And so so think about how you spend your time and what percentage of it can you help to do it. And things I did when I was a teenager in India was adult education or adult literacy or literacy. So that was something that was important, like people should be able to sign their names. And when I started in Intel, I did a lot for 8th graders, right? So what I would do is, even if there are people in your life, right, I would do it in three different ways. People in your life. For example, the lady who actually helps clean the house, her daughter is going to be the first one to graduate in their entire family. And she's one of the smartest people I know. And I mean it. So how can you spend with? And she told me she didn't think she could be an engineer. And of course she can, right? Because nobody else. And they told her, oh, no, nobody has been an engineer. You can't. And so for a lot of people, it might be as simple as working with people in 8th grade, 9th grade, and all, and she is going to be an engineer. She's gotten several admissions. But just knowing that they can do it because they don't have, I took it for granted that, oh, everybody has opportunity and all of that, right? Because I didn't know how important education is. But look around you in the school. Are there pockets of population or employees whose kids could use some mentoring from you who can't afford it, right? Just because they live in a different part of the city or because they just have relatives whose parents are not engineers. So start with people whose parents are not in STEM. And if they have kids, you can encourage. That's number one. Number two is Zoom or volunteer or anything. Like if you can go and join organizations. WECode is wonderful because you inspire each other. So never underestimate that, because life is a journey, not a data point at one optimization. So you need to continue to inspire each other. There's things like Women's Tech Network, Coding Girls, where you can volunteer with and virtually provide. And also, don't forget yourself. You need the oxygen mask in the plane on yourself before you help others. Similarly, continuing to invest in yourself before you help others or as you help others. So I kind of like thinking of time, right? Okay, if I spend 10 hours on this, maybe 1 hour on like maybe helping educate or something like that, right? Because you're at a different point in life than I am. So I can have a different ratio, or Lauren can have a different ratio. So long answer, but I would segment it into networks, into volunteering globally, like Women's Tech Network, and locally, like look around. And there are people like whose parents are not engineers, so they don't think they can be an engineer, or they don't think they can understand STEM. And, and also continuing to strengthen yourself, because you have a long journey where you can be contributing and helping and lifting others up.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I think you're absolutely right that it's not about where exactly, whether you're doing machine learning or you're doing networking or whatever. It's what your passion is and what you're able to do for others and what opportunities present themselves. And yeah, great. I think that's it for the questions. This is my first time doing a virtual session of this nature. So I'd kind of look out to the audience at this point and get a sense for how people were feeling. And we can't really do that right now, but I do hope that this has been edifying for those out in the audience. And I'll be around tomorrow to do some mentoring. I know there's lots of more sessions coming up with other great thought leaders, but I just want to say, Asha, it's been such a pleasure to hear your perspective. And, really, you do bring it all together from the technical to the social values. You really do. I think, it's clear that you're a leader in the space, and it's so nice to hear from you directly. And I'm sure that all the young women in the audience feel the same way. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And as the words of Robert and I said, go off and do something wonderful. And Lauren, pleasure speaking with you. I hope we meet in person soon because I just love the intersection of policy and technology. And thank you, WECode, for having me. Have fun the rest of the time.
Absolutely.